So we were going to talk about the tiara.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought it said no.
I know, but I just think it would look so fabulous if you
Yeah, but
did.
I've only got little tiny tiaras. They're not really worth it.
Nobody expected Prince Harry to leave. Not during a private royal jewelry presentation, not with William watching, and certainly not seconds after a jeweler revealed the destination of one of the Queen Mother's most emotionally charged possessions. But when a velvet case was opened, and the truth was spoken aloud that her diamond necklace had been left specifically to Prince George Harry's, expression changed. He remained silent for several agonizing seconds. Then he stood, pushed back his chair, and walked out. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Harry had entered expecting clarification, not a verdict that would strike deeper than money. The jewelry presentation had been arranged to settle ownership and future custody of pieces linked to the Queen Mother. Here, custody meant who was responsible for protecting and holding an item until its intended recipient could receive it. William understood why this necklace mattered. It was not just valuable, but tied to family memory, succession, and the future shape of the monarchy. The senior jeweler did not soften the announcement. He explained that the diamond necklace had been designated specifically for Prince George, placing it within the young heir's personal inheritance rather than a shared family collection. Personal inheritance meant the piece belonged to the named recipient, not to jewels available for wider family use. Harry looked toward William, and the prince did not smile. He knew his brother was hearing something larger than a name attached to diamonds. Harry felt the old distance become tangible. George was receiving a physical connection to the royal line that Harry had once stood closer to, and that symbolism hit harder than expected. William watched him carefully, aware that any satisfaction could feel cruel. The future king remained still, but his silence made the room heavier. The jeweler then revealed how the decision had been preserved. A documented inheritance instruction, attached to older private succession arrangements, protected the necklace's passage to the future heir. Succession arrangements were written plans governing how responsibilities or possessions moved through generations. Harry broke the silence. "Does it say the future heir?" he asked. "Or does it name George?" The jeweler answered from the documented account without hesitation. George was named personally. Harry pushed his chair backward. William said his name once, quietly. The Duke paused, gripping the chair as though deciding whether to answer, then released it and walked through the door. Yet that departure was only the surface. The real mystery lay in why the Queen Mother had singled out George so precisely, and what earlier family moment had made that choice impossible to undo. For William, Prince George inheriting the necklace represented continuity. For Harry, it represented distance. The same announcement carried two entirely different meanings depending on where each brother stood inside the royal story. One saw his son being entrusted with another piece of family history. The other saw a reminder of how profoundly his own place had changed. And behind their silence lay an uncomfortable truth. Jewelry inside the monarchy was rarely just jewelry. It carried memory, hierarchy, and belonging. William remained seated after his brother left. He reached forward and closed the velvet case himself, cutting off the jeweler before the man could touch it again. "Give him a moment," the prince said quietly. Nobody moved. George was William's eldest son, and a direct future heir, meaning he stood in the line expected one day to inherit the crown and its responsibilities. That made the necklace more than a family gift. It connected the Queen Mother's generation to William's, and from him directly to the boy who represented the monarchy's future. Harry's reaction, however, had nothing to do with resentment toward George. He cared about his nephew, and William knew that. What hurt was the symbolism. The Duke had grown up surrounded by objects connected to grandparents, childhood ceremonies, and women whose memories shaped both brothers. Those things had once felt like shared family history. Now, another powerful piece was moving toward the branch of the family Harry increasingly felt separated from. William felt pride for his son, but he refused to show it as victory. He lowered his voice whenever George's name came up, knowing even innocent satisfaction could sound cruel after what had just happened. The future king understood that Harry had not walked away because a child received diamonds. He had walked away because the decision reminded him that the royal future was continuing without him at its center. Catherine learned what happened later through William's private account of the meeting. She listened carefully when he repeated Harry's exact question about whether George had been named personally. That detail troubled her. The princess realized the Duke had not simply reacted to surprise. He appeared to recognize something about the wording, as though he already knew older inheritance arrangements existed. William received an even more unsettling update before the evening ended. The jeweler informed him that a separate written instruction accompanied the necklace. It did not merely identify George as the recipient. It explained why the Queen Mother wanted the piece protected specifically for him. That changed everything. The brothers' reactions had revealed the emotional cost of the decision, but the reason behind it had been set in motion long before George could understand what inheritance meant, and one forgotten family conversation was about to explain why. The necklace had not reached George by accident. Its path had been shaped by a specific moment the family almost stopped discussing altogether, a private conversation connected to one of the Queen Mother's final jewelry reviews. That moment became the trigger for everything that followed. A piece once worn as a symbol of royal permanence was quietly separated from the ordinary collection, protected by unusually precise instructions, and directed toward a generation that had not yet stepped into its destiny. The Queen Mother had treated the diamond necklace differently from many of her other jewels. She reserved it for occasions carrying unusual family weight, which gave the piece a meaning far beyond its value. After her death, her personal collection was divided into different categories. Some pieces could continue circulating for royal use, while others were governed by private inheritance instructions, meaning they were intended for named individuals or specific family lines. The necklace fell into that second, more sensitive category. One private jewelry review changed everything. Shortly before the final inheritance arrangements were sealed, the Queen Mother asked that the necklace pass through William's line to his eldest heir. She wanted at least one important family jewel tied directly to the future sovereign, instead of moving between relatives. The documented account of that conversation made the intention unmistakable. What seemed like a quiet administrative decision became the point of no return. Harry later struggled with what that distinction meant. He did not blame George, but he could not ignore the symbolism. If the necklace had always been intended to travel through William's branch, then one of the family's most powerful objects had never been meant to move equally between Diana's sons. That realization cut deeply. William, meanwhile, felt trapped between defending a choice he had never made and protecting his son from resentment created long before George could understand any of it. The accompanying note made the decision even more striking. The Queen Mother had not chosen the necklace because it was the most expensive piece. She believed objects carrying visible family history could teach a future monarch about obligation, continuity, and the burden of inheritance. The instruction also warned that the arrangement should not be altered because of changing family relationships. That single line suddenly felt almost prophetic. William read the final paragraph alone and lowered the page without speaking. Catherine entered moments later and immediately recognized that something had changed. He explained the wording to her, and she understood why Harry's walkout could no longer be dismissed as a burst of anger. William knew the past had explained the necklace, but it had not healed the present. He could not leave his brother's departure unanswered, and when he finally went to find Harry, there would be no jewelers, advisors, or palace officials between them, only two brothers and a wound that had been waiting years to surface. When William finally entered the room where Harry had gone, there were no courtiers waiting to soften the conversation, no jeweler, no announcement, no ceremonial language, just two brothers and an inheritance neither of them had chosen. Harry's anger had cooled into something harder, disappointment. William's instinct was to defend George, but he knew that doing so too aggressively would miss the real wound. The confrontation that followed was not about diamonds. It was about belonging. Harry had already refused several attempts from aides to bring him back into the formal discussion. William dismissed everyone before entering, making sure no palace official could interrupt what needed to be said. The prince went straight to the point. George had not asked for the necklace, he told his brother, and the boy could not become a symbol in an argument created by adults. Harry listened, but his expression did not soften. Harry finally answered with the frustration he had been holding back. George was not the problem. The Duke cared about his nephew, and William knew that. What hurt was watching every important symbol of continuity move naturally toward the future king's branch, while his own connection to royal history seemed to depend on circumstances that could change. For Harry, the necklace represented another door quietly closing. William felt his patience tighten. He understood the pain, but he would not apologize for his son receiving something explicitly intended for him. Inheritance, he argued, could not be rewritten every time a family member felt wounded. The future king reminded his brother that neither of them had created the Queen Mother's instruction. George was simply the person named to receive what she had chosen to preserve. Harry turned toward the door again. William reacted immediately. "Don't make George carry this." The words stopped the Duke before he could leave. For several seconds, neither brother spoke. Harry knew exactly what William meant. If this dispute became personal, the youngest person involved would inherit more than a necklace. He would inherit the resentment attached to it. Harry then disclosed something he had heard years earlier, through a private family conversation. He had understood that several of the Queen Mother's jewels would remain available across generations, instead of becoming permanently attached to one branch. William admitted he had heard similar assumptions, but the jewelers had now uncovered a more specific written instruction. The clause prevented the diamond necklace from being redistributed once its intended line had been identified. William lowered his voice because the argument had suddenly reached a limit neither brother could cross. Harry could challenge the meaning. William could defend George. But neither man could decide whether the instruction itself could be changed. Their confrontation had exposed the wound. Now one question remained, and it would take them directly to Charles. Did even the king have the power to overturn the Queen Mother's final direction? The argument eventually reached King Charles, but not in the form of a shouting match. It arrived as a closed file placed in front of him, and a question nobody in the room wanted to ask aloud. Could the king change what the Queen Mother had decided? Charles read every page before answering. Harry wanted fairness acknowledged. William wanted George protected. Yet Charles faced something different, the burden of choosing between paternal instinct and a dead matriarch's unmistakable instruction. Charles began with the inheritance documentation and the jeweler's historical record. The papers mattered because they established whether the necklace belonged to ordinary royal use or to a specific private recipient. Crown jewelry, in simple terms, refers to pieces held for the monarchy and used according to royal tradition rather than owned as ordinary personal property. This necklace was different. The records showed it had been separated from pieces meant for lending or ceremonial rotation and placed under a private instruction tied directly to George. The king then reached the account of Harry's reaction. He read the Duke's comments carefully and stopped more than once. Charles understood the wound beneath them. His younger son had not simply heard that George was receiving diamonds. He had heard another reminder that the family's visible future now moved through William's children. That distinction mattered because Charles was not only ruling on an inheritance question. He was trying to prevent an old family fracture from becoming even more permanent. William spoke to his father privately before any decision was announced. The prince admitted that he did not want the necklace if keeping it meant publicly humiliating Harry. But he drew a hard line immediately after. George's inheritance could not become negotiable simply because the announcement had caused pain. The future king would not allow his son's place in the family to be treated like something that could be bargained away for peace. Charles removed his glasses and placed them beside the file. "Giving it up won't fix what's actually broken," he told William. The prince did not answer. He knew his father was right. Surrendering the necklace might silence one argument, but it would leave the deeper resentment untouched. The jeweler's documented confirmation then closed the remaining escape route. Altering the necklace's destination would directly contradict the Queen Mother's private instruction, meaning Charles could not redirect it as though it were an ordinary royal possession. Even more strikingly, a handwritten explanation stated that the young heir should receive responsibility for it before becoming king, so his parents could teach him the history and duty attached to it. Charles finally made his decision. George's inheritance would stand. But before Harry could hear that answer directly, word of his walkout began escaping the private circle. The king now knew what could not be changed. What the family was about to lose control of was something far more dangerous, the story itself. By the time the family understood how serious Harry's walkout had become, the argument had already changed shape. What began as a private reaction to a necklace was becoming a test of loyalty, inheritance, and the future of the royal line. Catherine worried about George being pulled into a controversy he had never created. Charles worried about Harry interpreting silence as rejection. And William faced the most uncomfortable task of all, telling his son why adults were arguing over something meant for him. Catherine moved quickly to protect George from the emotional weight surrounding the decision. She told William that the boy could not be allowed to see the necklace as proof that he had defeated anyone. Royal custodians, the people formally responsible for safeguarding important family objects until they can be transferred or used, would continue holding the peace for now. That gave the family time. More importantly, it gave George distance from a dispute built around adult history, old expectations, and wounds he had never caused. William felt his anger rise as his son's name became central to conversations happening far beyond him. The prince understood that George's place in the line of succession naturally carried privileges and responsibilities, but he refused to let the child become the face of someone else's disappointment. He told Catherine that whatever happened next, nobody would make George apologize for an inheritance chosen before he was old enough to understand what it meant. Harry struggled for a different reason. His decision to leave had lasted only moments, yet it was beginning to define the entire dispute. The Duke knew why he had walked out. The announcement had overwhelmed him, but the gesture now threatened to suggest something harsher, that he resented George himself. That interpretation disturbed him, because it turned personal grief into hostility toward a child he genuinely cared about. Catherine eventually sat with George and gave him the simplest explanation possible. She told him that someone from an earlier generation had wanted him to look after a special family necklace one day. The young prince listened carefully before answering that he would keep it safe. William heard those words and felt his anger collapse into something quieter. His son had reduced an explosive royal argument to its most basic meaning: responsibility. Charles then settled the practical question. The king decided the necklace would remain with the appointed custodians until George reached the proper stage to assume responsibility for it. Its ownership, however, would not be reconsidered. Harry received that decision privately and understood that his father had refused to erase the Queen Mother's original instruction. Harry did not explode. He did not walk out again. Instead, he asked for another conversation with William, alone. The first meeting had exposed everything they were angry about. The second would reveal whether either brother was prepared to let that anger go. Harry's second meeting with William began completely differently. There was no jeweler between them, no velvet case on the table, no document waiting to be interpreted. He came without demands. William came without rehearsed defenses. For the first time since the necklace had been revealed, the two brothers were forced to speak about the feeling beneath the argument, the fear that family history itself had become divided into winners and outsiders. What followed changed the meaning of Harry's walkout. Harry had asked for complete privacy. No aides, no advisors, no Charles, no Catherine. He wanted his brother to hear him without anyone translating the emotion into palace language. The Duke began by accepting the central fact. The Queen Mother's instruction named George, and neither the boy nor William had created that decision. The wording was clear. The inheritance would stand. What remained unresolved was everything Harry had felt when he heard it. Harry admitted that leaving had been impulsive. He had not walked out because he wanted the necklace for himself, and he had not walked out because he resented George. The moment had overwhelmed him because the diamonds represented a royal future he once believed he would always remain close to. Watching another historic object move toward William's branch forced him to confront how much distance now existed between his memories of family and his current place within it. William listened without interrupting. The prince then admitted his own mistake. He had immediately interpreted Harry's reaction as something dangerous for George, instead of recognizing the grief underneath it. That mattered, because the future king had been defending his son before fully understanding what his brother was actually mourning. William could protect the boy and still acknowledge Harry's pain. For the first time, both brothers seemed to understand that those truths did not have to compete. Harry finally said the words William had not expected. "I don't want it changed." The Duke told him George should receive the necklace exactly as the Queen Mother intended. William asked if he was certain. Harry answered that the boy should never be made to feel guilty for inheriting his own family history. William offered something in return. He would make sure Harry received a copy of the necklace's historical record, meaning the documented story of its ownership, use, and intended passage through the family. The diamonds might belong to George, but their history did not have to belong to one branch alone. Harry then made one final request. When George was old enough to understand what had happened, William should tell him that his uncle walked out because the moment exposed something painful in himself, not because he blamed the boy. Inside the family, that admission changed everything. But outside the palace, nobody had heard it yet. The world knew only one explosive detail. Harry had walked out when George's inheritance was announced. The public did not hear the quiet reconciliation first. It heard the explosive version. Harry had walked out after learning that the Queen Mother's diamond necklace belonged to Prince George. Within hours, the story became larger than the jewelry itself. Commentators treated the gesture as proof of a family divide. Others saw it as an intensely human reaction to changing status and lost proximity. But one public moment transformed the story from private royal tension into a national conversation about inheritance and identity. Harry realized almost immediately that the argument had escaped the family. The public focused less on the necklace's financial value and more on what it represented. Another historic link moving toward George, the young heir positioned within the monarchy's future. Succession, in plain terms, is the order determining who stands next to inherit the crown. That made the story emotionally powerful, because it connected private family pain to the rigid structure surrounding William's eldest son. The debate split quickly. Some defended the Queen Mother's clear intention, arguing that an inheritance tied to the future sovereign should remain exactly where she had placed it. Others sympathized with Harry, seeing his reaction as the painful response of someone watching his former closeness to royal life become increasingly distant. The Duke had accepted George's inheritance privately, but the public had not heard that conversation. Then one front page changed the tone completely. A major London newspaper ran a close photograph of Harry leaving the engagement beneath the words, "The necklace, the heir, the walkout." Copies appeared at newsstands near Buckingham Palace, turning a complicated family dispute into 3 brutal phrases. Harry saw the headline and understood immediately what it suggested. His moment of hurt had been frozen into something that looked like resentment toward his nephew. William felt the same frustration from the opposite side. The prince knew his brother had already said George should receive the necklace exactly as intended. Yet none of that private reconciliation appeared in the public version. Instead, the future king watched a painful misunderstanding harden into a story of rivalry between an uncle and a child. Charles decided silence could make the damage worse. Through an authorized palace clarification, the king confirmed that the necklace's established destination would be respected, while refusing to criticize Harry or disclose private conversations. A palace clarification simply meant an official statement intended to correct the public record without revealing sensitive family details. The response emphasized one point above all others. The Queen Mother's instruction would stand, and the necklace would remain protected for Prince George under the agreed custodial arrangements. The noise eventually began to fade, but the family still faced one final choice. The diamonds already had an owner. What remained undecided was the meaning attached to them, and whether this inheritance would forever represent division or something far more difficult to achieve: acceptance. In the end, nothing about the inheritance was reversed. Prince George remained the designated recipient of the Queen Mother's diamond necklace. Charles upheld the instruction. William accepted the responsibility attached to it, and Harry, after the anger of that first unbearable moment, chose not to fight the decision. That choice became the real conclusion. The diamonds stayed where they had always been intended to go, but the family finally separated inheritance from affection and resentment from the innocent child standing at the center of it. Charles closed the matter without condemning his younger son or reopening the inheritance itself. The king confirmed that the necklace would remain protected until George reached the appropriate stage to assume responsibility for it. That arrangement mattered because the piece was not simply being stored, it was being preserved according to a private generational instruction, meaning a deliberate decision that directed an object from one generation to another. Harry's pain had been acknowledged, but the Queen Mother's choice would not be rewritten, because the family had struggled to accept it. William later told Catherine that his brother had accepted the outcome. The prince felt relief, but not because the diamonds were secure. He had never feared losing the necklace as much as he feared George becoming connected to resentment he had never earned. Catherine understood the difference immediately. She knew William wanted his son to inherit history without inheriting the bitterness surrounding it, and Harry's change of heart finally made that possible. Harry had reached a difficult truth of his own. His walkout exposed grief he had never fully faced. He could love his family while still feeling hurt by how far his place within the monarchy had shifted. Those emotions did not cancel each other out. The Duke finally understood that George receiving something meaningful did not erase his own memories, his own relationships, or his own place in the family story. Harry spoke to George before leaving. He did not mention the argument, the headlines, or the complicated inheritance arrangements. Instead, he told his nephew that one day he would be trusted with something important from their family, and when that day came, he should learn about the people behind it, rather than simply admiring the jewels. George listened quietly, and the Duke left knowing the boy would not carry the blame for what had happened. William understood the deeper lesson too. Preserving history meant more than protecting diamonds behind locked doors. It meant teaching the next generation why those objects mattered, who carried them before, and what emotional weight sometimes traveled with them. The Queen Mother's diamonds would pass to Prince George exactly as intended. Harry could not change that inheritance, and ultimately chose not to. What he did change was the meaning of his departure. A moment that began as rejection ended as acceptance, leaving the monarchy with a hard but unmistakable lesson. Crowns, titles, and jewels move from generation to generation, but family survives only when people decide that love must carry more weight than possession. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.